The text this week is from Exodus chapter 13. The Lord said to Moses, "Consecrate to me every firstborn male, the first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal." After the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites and gives it to you, as He promised on oath to you and your ancestors, you are to give over to the Lord the first offspring of every womb. All the firstborn males of your livestock belong to the Lord. Redeem with a lamb every firstborn donkey, but if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem every firstborn among your sons. In days to come, when your children ask you, "What does this mean?" say to them, "With a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed the firstborn of both people and animals in Egypt. This is why I sacrifice to the Lord the first male offspring of every womb, and redeem each of my firstborn sons. And it will be like a sign on your hand, and a symbol on your forehead, that the Lord brought us out of Egypt with His mighty hand." This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. When I was a kid, I always thought it would be cool to be the oldest child, to be the firstborn. Just think of all the rights and privileges that come with that, all the rights of primogeniture, those that are written and unwritten. I think one of those unwritten rules is that the oldest child gets to hit the younger children whenever he wants, with no reason at all. Seemed nice. And then I read Genesis. Firstborn have it kind of hard in Genesis, if you think through some of the stories. So I started to doubt. And then I read Exodus. And it was then that I decided that it was okay to be the baby in the family. Not so bad after all. There's a lot about the firstborn in Exodus. This is the third chapter in a row that has mentioned the firstborn. And so since the sermon should do what the text does, this is the third week in a row that we're going to hear about the firstborn here in chapel. Let's remind ourselves of what happened in last week's episode. So a couple of verses from Exodus chapter 12. This is about the plague on the firstborn in Egypt. Exodus 12, verse 12. "On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals. And I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt." At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Now, this is a rough plague, the final plague. But in the context, I think it's understandable. Egypt is the bad guy in the story. Egypt is the oppressor. Egypt is the one who has begun the violence by demanding the death of Israel's children. First by the hands of their own midwives, then by the hands of anyone who would be willing to throw a baby into the Nile. So it's not a nice story, but I think we can understand the justification for it. If anyone's going to suffer in this story, it should be Egypt. And at this point in the story, they've been warned multiple times. And so they're being punished here for their hard-heartedness. But then we come to chapter 13. And there's something a bit unnerving about this, because it opens by saying, "Consecrate every firstborn of Israel, whether animal or human." Wait, come again? What was that? "Consecrate every firstborn of Israel, whether animal or human." This is not just for Egypt. God also demands the firstborn from His own people. And so I wonder what the word consecrate means. I think I know what it means in the last 2 chapters, to consecrate the firstborn. It's just the simple word kadesh, which means sanctify, make holy, consecrate. But maybe it doesn't mean here what I think it means. Let's look at the context here. Some things in chapter 13. The instruction does go on to say that you can redeem a firstborn donkey, but if you don't redeem it, then you break its neck. It then says that you consecrate your firstborn children because the Lord killed Egypt's firstborn. And then more, it says that you are to sacrifice the firstborn of every womb. So I had the sneaking suspicion here that consecrate the firstborn means to dedicate by slaughtering. And I'm a little bit uncomfortable with this in the story. Now, the discomfort for me is mitigated a little bit when we see that it's possible to redeem the firstborn. And indeed, that's what you can and should do for firstborn humans. That's the assumption here. And for me at least, there would be no problem. I'm the 4th born in my family, so I would have been safe in this circumstance, even if you couldn't redeem them. But the point is here, yeah, you're supposed to redeem. But even so, for me, the discomfort doesn't totally vanish at this point. Even though they can be redeemed, the point of the story is that God demands the firstborn, or else a price to be paid in their stead. There's still, you might say, a violence that takes place here. Let's call this whole thing the firstborn principle. My question is, what's behind the firstborn principle that's laid out here in Exodus 13? Well, like the 10th plague, which was a public statement of God's claims over Egypt, this firstborn principle recognizes that God has a rightful claim over all creation. It all belongs to God. But the first fruits, the first crops, the first animals, the first children, they belong to God in a special way. Just think about it. When something edible and nourishing both for your life and for your livelihood, springs forth from a seed that's buried in dirt, we see God at work in that process. Just because we can describe what happens with scientific terminology does not make the process and its result any less wonderful. The fact that we're the ones who may have buried the seed, that we may have even watered the seed, doesn't make the result any less a miraculous work of God. God is behind it all. And so to take that first crop and to relinquish it to the heavens is a sign of trust. It's a visible reminder that God is the giver of life. The Lord of the land is worthy of what belongs to the vassal. So without this Lord, there would be no crop in the first place. Likewise, we can scientifically describe the process by which a child is conceived and born. And as we know, humans must contribute to this process. But this doesn't make the process and its result any less wonderful or miraculous. God is the one who creates and sustains life in all of its processes. God is the one who is the ground of all being. The firstborn principle merely reminds us that we have no ultimate ownership rights over anything that we have. Even our lives are not our own, but are on loan to us from God. And so the firstborn belongs to the Lord in a special way. Because without the Lord, there would be no children. And so we give that first one to God. As becomes clear in the Akedah, the story of the binding of Isaac, God did not want a literal child sacrifice here. God made a provision for redemption. In that story, you remember it turns out to be a ram. But that does not mean that redemption is easy, or that God didn't actually demand Isaac's life. And my guess is that Isaac came down from that mountain a changed person. He knew from that moment on that his life was not his own. He was consecrated, and he knew firsthand the blessing of redemption. Israel also knew the blessing of redemption. And in fact, that's the other purpose here of the firstborn principle. So first of all, it acknowledges Yahweh's lordship. But second, in what the text explicitly mentions here, the firstborn principle is simply a reminder of deliverance. Again, from verse 14. In days to come, when your children ask you, what does this mean, this being the firstborn sacrifice, say to them, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Earlier in the story, in Exodus 4, verse 22, God said, Israel is my firstborn son. And this gives us a larger perspective. It's the whole nation who is God's treasured possession, consecrated to Him and redeemed. Without the Lord, they would not be. Jacob's descendants would have perished in Egypt if the Lord had not been on their side. In their attempt to escape, the children of Israel, firstborn and all, would have been swallowed up. But the snare was broken, and they were redeemed from servitude in order to serve another. So in the Old Testament story itself, we already see the hints of the firstborn principle being universalized. It's for everyone. We all, from the firstborn to the lastborn, belong to the Lord of the land. Even the case of Isaac doesn't quite fit the narrow interpretation. As we all know, Isaac was not Abraham's firstborn son. And more important, the command to spare Isaac was not based on the presence of a ram being there. God didn't look over at the ram and say, oh look, a ram there. Abraham, stop the knife. You don't have to kill Isaac. We have a substitute now. Yes, the text says that Abraham offered the ram instead of offering Isaac, but it functions more after the fact, like a thank offering in the story. The command to spare Isaac was non-negotiable, and it comes before any mention of the ram being there in the thicket. The son was redeemed, but not really by a ram. So, like the second-born Isaac and the second-born Jacob, like the whole nation of Israel, the Church of Jesus Christ is regarded as God's firstborn. That is according to Hebrews 12:23, which says, the church of the firstborn ones, whose names are written in heaven. But the basis of our redemption is in fact the same as the basis of the redemption for the ancients. The Moriah ram and the Passover lamb and all the firstborn sacrifices and redemptions are really nothing in themselves. As the text says, these are signs of something else here. Signs that point to and foreshadow the true Lamb of God. God the Son, the firstborn of all creation, in Jesus of Nazareth, gives Himself. He who was God's firstborn Son by nature, offered Himself for us who are God's children, His firstborn by grace. And this offering, this sacrifice, is not to appease a vengeful God, but instead it's the work of a merciful God on our behalf. A God who basically says to us, I will be wronged in this relationship, and you won't get what you deserve. And though you are the ones who are wronging me, this whole work will be reckoned for your redemption. That's how Isaac was ultimately redeemed, by a God who was willing to suffer at our hands and be wronged. And this is our redemption too. And so, every ram that we humans have offered, from Abel on down, is nothing more than us giving back to God what He has already given to us. So in response to this unique, efficacious offering of God on our behalf, like all firstborn, as we descend the mountain, consecrated, changed forever, let us remember by God's grace that we are not our own, but that we are bought with a price. Therefore, let us glorify God with our bodies, and let us offer living sacrifices to Him. And let us continually lift up sacrifices and offerings of praise and thanks, the first fruits of lips that confess His name.